Give a talk about CSR and carbon offsetting. So, what is CSR? As there isn't actually no set idea or statement explaining CSR, it can be described as being based on the idea that corporations can no longer act as though they are isolated economic entities operating without consideration of the broader society in which they operate. If implemented well, CSR gains a business an understanding of the social and environmental impact its business operations have both now and in the future. This knowledge enables a business to act responsibly in a positive, moral and sustainable way to the benefits of a wide range of stakeholders and not work purely towards financial gains for shareholders and investors. So CSR is being used by more and more companies to transform their corporate identity by including and promoting a greater amount of social responsibility. A good reputation is hard yet vital to build and maintain. A strong reputation in environmental and social responsibility can help a company build trust of its stakeholders and help to differentiate its products from those of its competitors, thus creating positive brand awareness, customer loyalty, and confidence in the company, all of which influence buying behaviour. However, this strong reputation needs to result from real practices and policies and not just greenwash. If CSR is structured into the core of a business, the strong positive association it can create for a brand can reduce the risk of future earnings for a business, strengthen economic success, and clearly contribute to shareholder value. However, greenwash can have a devastating effect, and the all-important company reputation can be tarnished and lost. Excuse me. One example of where reputation from inbuilt values has aided the success of a company is with American Apparel. American Apparel is one of the largest makes of t-shirts in the US and enjoys continuously growing sales. It differentiates itself from the low-cost competition with socially acceptable and sustainable production. It rewards its employees with higher average wages and creates local jobs through domestic production, as well as having a strong environmental record. The business case for increasing production costs is always a hard one to argue. However, American Apparel has made it work. So within American Apparel, they decided to pay above average wages. Not only does this have a positive effect on brand recognition, as mentioned, but there is growing evidence that a company's CSR activities are an increasingly important way to attract and retain good employees. This is important because higher employee engagement levels are highly correlated with better business performance, as measured by revenue, earnings, and other key business metrics. The much publicised scandal of the Nike sweatshops during the 1990s is a great example as to the negative effect badly implemented or poor CSR policy can have on a brand. The negative publicity Nike attracted was due to the low working conditions for some of the factories within Southeast Asia. Here is a case where, although Nike was in fact paying its workers in the factories in accordance with local customs and practices, a normal procedure for multinational companies when carrying out business in less developed countries, it was not acceptable to many of its stakeholders. There is no question that labour standards in such cases needed to be improved, regardless of whether the workers were reported to having said it was better than any alternative. However, getting the balance correct for a multinational company relies on a fully integrated and fluid CSR code which responds effectively to feedback from all stakeholders. Currently, there are schemes which companies can sign up to who use or own suppliers with factories abroad. Primark, as an example, bases its code of conduct on the International Labour Organisation's code. Marks and Spencer's use an alternative scheme known as Sustainability Framework and Ethical Model Factories. They have worked in partnership with factories to improve process efficiency, which they have used as a means to increase wages, reduce working hours, and protect the quality of its products. It is stated that the productivity in the Bangladeshi ethical model factories increased by 42%, while staff turnover reduced from 10% to 2.5%, and absenteeism reduced from 10% to 1.5%. Although not mentioned within the report which these figures are from, an additional benefit of such a programme can also be lower health costs from healthier employees that become more productive and more effective. This is a good example of CSR improving both employee retention, working conditions and operational effectiveness, which is also another widely stated advantage of CSR. But how is this achieved? Examples include investing in technology to control environmental risks, which often produce additional cost-cutting benefits through eco-efficiency, so reducing waste production and water usages using energy efficient, and in some cases by selling recycled materials, has the effect of reducing ecological impacts and resource intensity throughout the life cycle of products, so that more is made from less. This benefit was most often quoted by large businesses with established corporate responsibility programs. A good example here is with Dow Chemicals, who set themselves a target of reducing production of 26 toxic chemicals, which will save them €5.4 million per year. €2.3 million was spent on the initial initiative and initial investment to do so. This example is contrary to a widely held opinion that improved environmental management systems are expensive and have a weak business case. Another more general example of the benefits of operational effectiveness is with construction firms, where if they implement a policy or targets to reuse products on site, this has the knock-on effect of reducing the amount of waste sent to landfill, which reduces community and noise disturbance of additional trucks bringing material to the site and off the site. It is also important to note that operational efficiency is relevant throughout the supply chain, and as a result more businesses are requesting their suppliers to comply with CSR in order to create operational efficiency as well as to manage risk. Which is the next example. So managing risk is another well-cited advantage of CSR programs for global companies. A good CSR strategy will provide the framework and principles for stakeholder engagement and can supply a wealth of intelligence on emerging and current social issues groups to support the corporate risk agenda and ultimately serve as a countermeasure for social risk. It is considered by some that the more a company shows it is committed to CSR by complying with and going beyond legislation, the more lenient governments and regulators may be with the company. They may be given preferential treatment, for example, when applying for permits or permission to do something. And if an accident occurs, will be regarded more favourably if they have been transparent and socially responsible in the period running up to the accident. In summary, the more a company is committed to CSR, the less they're exposing themselves to business risks, and which reduces reputational risks, so bad press. According to the Ethical Investment Research Services, 6.7 billion is invested in ethical and environmental investment funds in the UK. Since 1985, most of the major investment organisations have launched ethical and socially responsibility funds. The variation in the types of ethical and sustainable investment on offer has created considerable growth in the ethical specialist IFA sector, with a number of firms now operating. There are estimated to be 21.8 billion investment assets under management in ethical, environmental funds in the UK, with the European SRI market growing from 2.2 trillion euros at the end of 2007 to 5 trillion euros at the end of 2009. The increased investor interest is a benefit which is interlinked with the many other benefits of CSR, as it occurs when responsible business practices leads to improvements in financial performance which has been shown to be linked to and include better access to capital, lower payment penalties, reduced costs, improved investor relations due to strong brand recognition, increased shareholder value and better returns and revenue. Organisational growth and business opportunity is another well-cited advantage of CSR. The challenge of finding profitable opportunities through satisfying stakeholder demand for responsible business has proven to lead to opportunities for organisational and business growth through mainly new markets, new products, new customers, new partnerships and innovation. This benefit can only be realised when or if a new business views such demands as opportunity and not constraints, and works with those stakeholders to achieve win-win solutions. In summary, CSR has many standalone benefits, but what is important to understand is how these are all interlinked. It is interesting to understand the challenges a multinational company has when implementing a global CSR code with the inherent differences and needs of its global stakeholders. However, overall, if CSR is put at the core of the business, it's been proven as an excellent tool for companies to expand and secure their business. If it requires a business to look at opportunities in different ways, producing basic t-shirts, yet spending more on wages and ensuring environmental compliance does not stack up well in a conventional business case. However, American Apparel has made it work. Marks & Spencer's has seen a greater productivity of staff from making their operations more effective and passing this benefit back to its employees, which has led to many hidden benefits. However, an effective CSR code is not easy to implement on a global scale and must be seen as fluid and able to adapt as necessary to avoid doing more harm than good for both the brand, the community and the environment. There are no definite figures on how many companies successfully implement a CSR strategy, one of the difficulties being that there is no agreed definition of CSR. Some companies focus more on social issues, others on more environmental issues, and of course others on both. This makes it inherently difficult to make comparisons and state exact numbers. However, in a report recently it states that multinational companies with their headquarters in the US are more likely to have a CRS policy. However, they are least likely to have negotiated it with its workers. It also states that most multinational companies within the UK are covered by a corporate code which includes CSR provisions, with 80% of them being international in scope and 20% having been negotiated with an international trade union. German and Nordic firms, on the other hand, are most likely to have negotiated a code with its workers, but are the least likely to have a code in the first place. And surprisingly, only 15 out of 27 of the EU member states have national policy frameworks to promote CSR. The European Commission has since the early 1990s has taken an active interest in CSR, and it recently released a policy on corporate social responsibility in October 2011. The report states that to fully meet their social responsibility enterprises, they should have in place a process to integrate social, environmental, ethical and human rights concerns into their business operations and core strategy. The report ends with the Commission calling on European business leaders, including those from the financial sector, to issue before mid-2012 an open and accountable commitment to promote, in close cooperation with public authorities and their stakeholders, the uptake of responsible business by a much larger number of EU enterprises. So the next question is whether CSR should be voluntary. On an international level, the lack of recognised definition and standard for CSR can cause some confusion and hesitation by some businesses. However, the question of whether CSR should be regulated by law is undecided. In the UK, there are laws or regulations covering CSR-related issues such as minimum wage, health and safety, and disclosure to investors, but none that cover the overall disclosure of environmental impact and almost nothing on community impact. And the most common reason against CSR legislation is the lowest common denominator argument. This suggests that if there was legislation around CSR, then companies will deliver what the law requires and nothing more. However, the argument goes that in reality, minimum wage legislation has not meant that we are all suddenly paid the minimum wage, and so there is still a business case for CSR. Then it would still be there after the legislation. The arguments state that legislation on performance functions as a flaw would remove all the long tail of underperformers and not the headroom for high achievers. Recently, the UK government set up a mandatory scheme aimed at improving energy efficiency and cutting emissions in large public and private sector organisations responsible for approximately 10% of the UK's emissions. The scheme features a range of reputational, behavioural and financial drivers which aims to encourage organisations to develop energy management strategies that promote a better understanding of their energy usage. So how and where does carbon offsetting fit into CSR? The hierarchy of actions recognised within the scheme and in general to combat the effects of climate change are firstly to understand and quantify greenhouse gas carbon emissions, then to implement strategies to avoid these emissions, then to reduce through energy efficiency measures. Offsetting is the last on this hierarchy. Many companies have internal set targets to bring their emissions to zero. However, where they are unable to make those reductions within the short term or where present technology solutions are not available, carbon offsetting can be used effectively. An example being with Marks & Spencer's, who have set a target that it would purchase carbon credits as part of its £200 million plan to go carbon neutral. The founders also of the popular travel guide Lonely Planet have also donated money to offset the flights that the staff makes in compiling their guides. These companies are therefore offsetting remaining emissions that cannot currently be avoided or reduced. The full effects of those emissions are instead being mitigated by reductions elsewhere in the world. Credits can be bought to fund reductions in emissions elsewhere in the world. It is stated that individuals and organisations are urged to follow the hierarchy above and only use offsetting where emissions are currently unavoidable. This can be transferred to many applications. For example, there's no point in paying for solar panels for your business if you have drafty windows and your lights are on all day. So in summary, CSR is a method or code of practice that a company creates and adheres to. This could be born from the need to reduce costs and as such focus on operational efficiency through to improving employee working conditions and as such employee retention and productivity and potentially also brand recognition. All factors have been shown to be somewhat interlinked in helping to reduce perceived risks for investors. CSR, if thought out and implemented well, will therefore bring about numerous benefits to a company, some of which cannot be quantified. Within CSR, the issue of reporting without a recognised standard structure makes it hard for fair comparisons between companies to be made. Here, there are some reporting styles that are aimed at helping companies fully disclose and quantify their CSR activities, and here it is important to state that full disclosure is the first step. There have been talks about making CSR legal, the 2% idea that all companies should spend 2% on CSR. However, there is a strong argument against. CSR is growing and not going away. The talk as to the removal of CSR sectors within large businesses is not due to business turning its back on CSR, but instead due to it being so well integrated within the core of the business that it is not considered anymore as a separate entity. There are some that agree and always some that do not, but it would seem that CSR will remain a core business strategy. And as Michael Porter and Mark Kramer state, successful companies do not view economic success and social responsibility as a dilemma. Instead, they integrate social responsibility as a source of innovation and lasting competitiveness. Essentially, they do exactly what successful companies do. They get better, are more competitive every day to fill the expectations of their shareholders and stakeholders. Yeah.